Well, for more on this story, we can bring in France 24's Wassim Nasr, who's also an expert on jihadist terrorism. Wassim, we heard from the Australian Prime Minister then that these attackers were inspired by Islamic State ideology. But does this mark a resurgence in activity by the Islamic State group?
Well, actually, maybe not, because being inspired by this ideology is one thing, and being missioned by this by the Islamic State is another. So we see here that it's a father and his son. We're talking about a low-cost attack, despite the fact that they have many victims. It is still a soft target. You know, they did not attack the Australian army, for example. So it's all about the opportunity. They had the opportunity because of this gathering of the Jewish community, which was public. And so it wasn't a secret. There's going to be a Hanukkah gathering at this point. So they grabbed the opportunity. For the fact that they go to the Philippines, and what did they do in the Philippines? They might have went to the Philippines, but as it was said, the Islamic State is very weak there since 2017, and the loss of Marawi after long battles with the Philippine army and with the U.S. army at that time. So maybe they got trained there, maybe not. They could have trained on shotguns in the Australian desert, you see. So it's not a gain of activity for the Islamic State per se, but actually the calls of the Islamic State to target the Jewish community since the beginning, since ever, and more since the beginning of the war in Gaza, but also the calls by al-Qaeda to target the Jewish community, where actually it materialized here with this unexpected attack for the Australian authorities.
Meanwhile, there was actually another attack in Syria, in Palmyra. You've actually just got back from Syria. You were there at the time of the attack. No one has claimed a responsibility for that so far, but what do we know about it?
So as the attack in Sydney, it wasn't claimed. The attack in Palmyra wasn't claimed. What we know this far is actually one member of the security forces turned his arms, his weapon, against the U.S. forces, which were for the first time conducting a joint meeting with the new Syrian authorities in Palmyra. Palmyra, which I visited last summer, actually, it's an area where the Islamic State is still very active in this part of the Syrian desert. We know that the person who did this is originally from the area of Aleppo. It wasn't claimed yet, and we don't know if he did it for incited by the Islamic State or for personal reasons, because this kind of attack is what we call those kind of attacks which we call the green on blue attacks, meaning one member actually of the security forces, which are supposed to be allies, turn its arms against the force which was here, the U.S. Army. We know that the U.S. Army got this kind of attacks on many occasions, especially in Afghanistan, more than 150 casualties, green on blue attacks. And we know, for example, that lately in the U.S. in 2019 in Pensacola, al-Qaeda pushed a Saudi jet pilot to attack his fellow Americans, actually.
So does this mean that Syrian security forces have been infiltrated by militants or by the Islamic State group?
Of course, they are being infiltrated, because this is the purpose of the Islamic State, to infiltrate them, since they need more and more manpower. But it does not mean that they are totally infiltrated by the Islamic State. So people are being vetted, and as I said, the green on blue attacks are very common regarding the U.S. Army, either in Afghanistan or even in Pensacola. And what we see here, it's an attack that occurred a few hours ago in Bukamal, which is a bordering town between Syria and Iraq, and we know that security situation is very fragile in Syria, actually, and this kind of attacks will occur, especially since the fact that Syria entered the coalition against the Islamic State.
So can we say that there's been a resurgence in Islamic State group activity? Why now? 1 year after Bashar al-Assad's fall in Syria, and what is the new Syrian administration, the new government, doing about it?
Well, actually, the blood debt between the new Syrian administration and the Islamic State goes back way behind to 2013, actually, because Ahmad al-Shara, the actual Syrian president, was the one who ignited the war in jihadi ranks between the Islamic State and al-Qaeda back in 2013. So today, 1 year after the fall of Assad, Syria being part of this coalition against the Islamic State makes the speech or the propaganda of the Islamic State more and more maybe audible by people who feel kind of resentment toward the new authorities because of this being part of the coalition, but also because of all the measures that were undertaken by the new Syrian authorities regarding, for example, minorities, regarding the West, and the change of alliances on the ground. So we have a map to see maybe the latest attacks that occurred since Syria entered the coalition, and we see it in the areas controlled actually by the Syrian authorities. We had maybe one security member killed in Dar Hassan, another 4 in Ma'arat Nu'man, 2 in Al Zerbi. But we are talking about targeted attacks, assassinations, blowing up cars, as we saw earlier. But it is nothing significant as you could have imagined the Islamic State back at the time in Syria and Iraq. And here we see it on the map. And the particular thing about the attacks that we see in green, that actually they targeted former Assad regime members. You see, so those are assassinations targeting former regime members in green, and all the others were targeted at the new Syrian authorities. And this is since the entrance of Syria in the new coalition. Since the fall of Assad, maybe a little bit more than 20 security members were killed by Islamic State militants, either claimed or not claimed.